The bullet missed Penelope Kane by 3 inches when the bank robbery started, but by the time the dust settled and all 5 outlaws lay dead in the street, folks said she had somehow caused the whole terrible affair just by being there to deposit her late father's life savings. It was July of 1883 in Shoshone, Idaho, a rough mining town that had seen its share of violence, but never anything quite like the bloodbath that afternoon. Penelope stood on the wooden boardwalk outside the bank, her dark hair disheveled and her green eyes wide with shock as the townspeople gathered around the bodies. She clutched her reticule to her chest, the money still inside, undeposited. Sheriff Morrison was directing his deputies to cover the corpses with blankets when Martha Henderson, the banker's wife, pointed a trembling finger at Penelope. "She brought this on," Martha said, her voice shrill with grief. Her husband lay inside the bank with a bullet wound to the shoulder, alive but in terrible pain. Ever since that girl came to town 3 months ago, nothing but misfortune follows. Penelope wanted to protest, to defend herself, but what could she say? The whispers had started even before she arrived in Shoshone. Her father had died in a mining accident 2 weeks after she came to live with him, crushed when a support beam gave way in a tunnel that had been stable for years. Then the boarding house where she took a room caught fire, though everyone escaped and only one room was damaged. It happened to be the room directly below hers. The blacksmith who had been courting her broke his leg in 3 places when his horse threw him on their second outing. A merchant who smiled at her too long lost his entire shipment when his wagon overturned crossing a creek that was barely 6 inches deep. "I did not cause this," Penelope said quietly, but her voice was lost in the commotion. "Bad luck," someone muttered in the growing crowd. Bad luck to any man who gets close to her. Penelope felt the familiar sting of tears but refused to let them fall. She had heard these accusations before, in different towns, in different words. Her mother had warned her before she died that some people would never understand, that beauty combined with unfortunate coincidence could make folks superstitious. But knowing the truth of it and living with the consequences were 2 different things entirely. She turned and walked back toward the boarding house, her boots clicking on the wooden planks. Behind her, she heard the sheriff calling for the undertaker and someone mentioning that all 5 outlaws had been killed by a single man, a stranger who had walked into the bank just moments before the robbery began. The stranger had moved with such speed and precision that the whole thing was over in less than a minute. He had tipped his hat to the banker and walked out before anyone could properly thank him. Penelope did not look back. She knew what would come next. The whispers would grow louder. The other boarders would avoid her. Eventually, she would have to leave Shoshone just as she had left 3 other towns before it. At 22 years old, she was tired of running, tired of starting over, tired of being blamed for the random cruelties of fate. She reached the boarding house and climbed the stairs to her small room on the 2nd floor. It was sparsely furnished with just a bed, a washstand, and a trunk containing all her worldly possessions. She sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to cry, not from fear or sadness, but from sheer exhaustion. How many times could a person start over before they simply gave up? A knock on the door interrupted her tears. She wiped her eyes quickly and stood. "Yes." "Miss Kane, there is a gentleman here to see you." It was Mrs. Porter, the boarding house owner, and her voice carried a note of suspicion. Penelope opened the door. "I am not expecting anyone." Mrs. Porter was a stout woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She looked Penelope up and down with barely concealed disapproval. "He says it is important, about the incident at the bank." "I will be right down." Penelope checked her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. tucking stray hairs back into place and smoothing her dark blue dress. She did not know what to expect as she descended the stairs to the front parlor, where Mrs. Porter allowed visitors during appropriate hours. The man waiting for her was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin. He wore dark trousers, a clean white shirt, and a leather vest. His hat was in his hands, revealing sandy brown hair that was slightly too long and fell across his forehead. When he turned to face her, Penelope found herself looking into the clearest blue eyes she had ever seen. He appeared to be perhaps 26 or 27 years old, with a strong jaw and a small scar above his left eyebrow. "Miss Kane," he said, his voice deep and steady. "My name is Benjamin Carter. I hope I am not intruding." "Mr. Carter." She remained standing near the doorway, aware that Mrs. Porter was hovering just outside in the hall. "How may I help you? I wanted to make sure you were all right after what happened at the bank. That must have been terrifying." Penelope studied him carefully. He did not look like a man seeking to place blame or spread gossip. There was genuine concern in his eyes, but also something else. Recognition struck her suddenly. "You were the man who stopped the robbery. I happened to be in the right place at the right time. The sheriff will want to speak with you. There will be questions. I already spoke with him." Benjamin took a step closer, his hat still in his hands. "Miss Kane, I also heard what people were saying outside the bank about you being bad luck." Penelope stiffened. So that was it. He had come to warn her to leave town, or perhaps to add his own accusations to the pile. "And you came here to tell me you agree with them?" "No." His answer was firm, almost sharp. "I came to tell you that I think it is complete nonsense." She blinked, caught off guard. "You do?" "Those outlaws have been terrorizing banks from here to Montana for 6 months. They came to Shoshone because the bank had a large deposit from the mining company. It had nothing to do with you being there. The fire at the boarding house was caused by a faulty lamp. Mining accidents happen every day because the companies cut corners on safety, and horses throw riders for reasons that have nothing to do with the person in the saddle." Penelope felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. "You seem to know a great deal about my supposed misfortunes." "I have been in town for 2 days, staying at the hotel across the street. People talk. I listened." He took another step closer. "I also know that you have been volunteering at the church, helping with the children's reading lessons, and that you brought soup to old Mr. Henderson when he was sick last week, and that you found the Reynolds family's lost dog and returned it safely. Seems to me like you bring more good fortune than bad." "Why are you telling me this?" Penelope asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I know what it is like to be judged unfairly, and because I wanted you to know that not everyone in this town believes the superstitious nonsense." He paused, then added, "And because I was hoping you might agree to have dinner with me tomorrow evening." Penelope's first instinct was to refuse. Every man who had shown interest in her had suffered for it, whether through genuine bad luck or simply the weight of public opinion driving them away. But there was something different about Benjamin Carter. He stood before her with complete confidence, no trace of fear or hesitation in his manner. "That would not be wise," she said carefully. "You have heard the stories. What if something happens to you? Then it happens. But I do not believe it will, and I do not intend to let unfounded rumors prevent me from getting to know someone who interests me. You are either very brave or very foolish, Mr. Carter." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I have been called both, though usually not in the same conversation. Will you have dinner with me, Miss Kane?" She should say no. It was the sensible thing to do, the safe thing. But Penelope was tired of being sensible and safe, tired of letting fear dictate her choices. "Yes," she said. "I will have dinner with you." "Good. I will call for you at 6 o'clock. He placed his hat back on his head and tipped it to her politely. Until tomorrow, Miss Kane. After he left, Mrs. Porter appeared in the hallway, her expression pinched. That was the man from the bank shooting. You should be careful, Miss Kane. The last thing we need is more trouble. He seems like a perfect gentleman. That may be, but people are already talking. If anything happens to him, then they will blame me, just as they always do. Penelope met the older woman's gaze steadily. But I refuse to live my life in fear of what people might say, Mrs. Porter. Good day. She returned to her room, her heart beating faster than usual. Benjamin Carter had looked at her as though she were a woman worth knowing, not a curse to be avoided. It had been so long since anyone had looked at her that way. She went to her trunk and pulled out her best dress, a deep green silk that her mother had made for her 3 years ago. It would need pressing, but it would do nicely for dinner. The next day seemed to crawl by with painful slowness. Penelope went to the general store for thread and needles, aware of the stares and whispers that followed her. She held her head high and conducted her business quickly. In the afternoon, she helped at the church, as she did every Tuesday and Thursday, reading with the younger children and helping them practice their letters. Reverend Walsh was one of the few people in town who had never treated her with suspicion. You seem happier today, Miss Kane, he observed as she was preparing to leave. Do I? She smiled. Perhaps I am just enjoying the sunshine. Or perhaps it has something to do with the tall cowboy who has been asking questions about you all over town. Penelope felt her cheeks warm. News travels fast. It always does in a small town. The Reverend, a kind man in his 60s with white hair and gentle eyes, smiled at her. Benjamin Carter seems like a good man. I spoke with him this morning. He was very interested in the work you do here with the children. He is taking me to dinner this evening. I am glad. You deserve happiness, Miss Kane. Do not let small-minded people convince you otherwise. At 6 o'clock precisely, Benjamin knocked on the boarding house door. Penelope descended the stairs in her green dress, her hair arranged in soft waves and pinned up with her mother's silver combs. She saw something flicker in his eyes when he looked at her, something warm and appreciative that made her pulse quicken. You look beautiful, he said simply. Thank you. You look very handsome yourself. He did. He wore a dark suit that fit his broad frame perfectly, and his boots were polished to a shine. He offered her his arm, and she took it, very aware of the strength in his muscles beneath the fabric of his jacket. They walked down Main Street toward the hotel restaurant, the finest dining establishment in Shoshone. Penelope could feel eyes on them from every direction, could almost hear the whispers starting up again. But Benjamin seemed completely unconcerned, chatting easily about the weather and asking about her work at the church. The restaurant was half full when they arrived, and several conversations stopped abruptly as they entered. The host, a thin man named Gregory, looked between them nervously. Mr. Carter, we have a nice table near the window for you. That will be perfect, Benjamin said, apparently oblivious to the tension in the room. Once they were seated and had ordered their meals, Penelope finally asked the question that had been on her mind all day. What brings you to Shoshone, Mr. Carter? You mentioned you had only been here 2 days. Please call me Benjamin, or Ben if you prefer. He leaned back in his chair, completely at ease. I am a ranch foreman, or at least I was until recently. I have been working on various ranches since I was 16, learning the business. I came to Idaho looking to start my own place. There is good grazing land north of here, near the Sawtooth Mountains. I have been scouting locations. That sounds like ambitious work. It is what I have always wanted to do. My father was a rancher in Colorado, but he lost everything in a drought when I was 15. Took work as a hired hand and drank himself to death within a year. I promised myself I would not end up the same way. I have been saving every penny for 10 years, learning everything I could about raising cattle and managing land. I am sorry about your father. It was a long time ago. He looked at her directly, those blue eyes steady and honest. What about you, Penelope? May I call you Penelope? Yes, of course. How did you end up in Shoshone? She told him about her mother dying of pneumonia 2 years ago, about her father sending for her to come live with him after years of estrangement, about arriving in Idaho only to lose him 2 weeks later. He left me enough money to live on for a while, but I will need to find work eventually. I have been helping at the church for free, but I hope to become a teacher once there is an opening. You are good with children. I love teaching. My mother was a teacher before she married my father. She taught me to read before I was 4 years old. Books have always been my refuge. Their food arrived, and they ate while continuing to talk. Benjamin told her about his travels, about the different ranches where he had worked and the things he had learned. He spoke about his dreams for his own ranch, about breeding strong cattle and building something that would last. Penelope found herself relaxing in his company, laughing at his stories and sharing her own. They were finishing dessert when Sheriff Morrison approached their table. He was a barrel-chested man in his 50s with a thick mustache and a perpetual look of suspicion. "Mr. Carter, I wanted to thank you again for your help yesterday. Those outlaws have been a plague on this territory. I was glad to be of assistance, Sheriff." Morrison glanced at Penelope, his expression neutral but not unkind. "Miss Kane, I hope you are recovering from the shock of it all." "I am, thank you, Sheriff." After the sheriff left, Benjamin said quietly, "He seems like a decent man. He has always been fair to me, even when others were not." They left the restaurant and walked slowly back toward the boarding house. The evening was pleasantly cool, and the sky was turning deep purple as the sun set behind the mountains. Penelope was very aware of Benjamin's presence beside her, of the easy way he matched his stride to hers. "I enjoyed this evening very much," she said as they reached the boarding house steps. "So did I. Would you consider having dinner with me again? Perhaps tomorrow." "Benjamin, I need to be honest with you. I have seen this pattern before. A man shows interest, things go wrong, and eventually he decides I am not worth the trouble. I would rather you walk away now than after I have allowed myself to care." He was quiet for a moment, looking down at her in the gathering darkness. Then he reached out and gently took her hand. "Penelope, I do not believe in curses or bad luck. I believe in choices and consequences and random chance. But most of all, I believe in what I can see with my own eyes. And what I see is a strong, intelligent, kind woman who deserves to be treated with respect and affection. Whatever misfortunes have befallen the people around you are not your fault, and I will not be scared away by superstitious gossip. You say that now, and I will keep saying it. Have dinner with me tomorrow, and the day after that, if you are willing. Give me a chance to prove that I mean what I say." Penelope looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. Against her better judgment, against every instinct that told her to protect herself, she nodded. "All right, tomorrow." He smiled, and it transformed his entire face, making him look younger and more carefree. "Tomorrow, then. Good night, Penelope." "Good night, Benjamin." She watched him walk away, her hand still warm from his touch, and allowed herself a small flicker of hope. The next week passed in a blur of dinners, walks, and conversations that stretched for hours. Benjamin called on her every day, completely unconcerned with the disapproving looks and whispered comments that followed them everywhere. They walked along the creek that ran behind the town, sat on the bench outside the church while she told him about the children she taught, and shared picnic lunches under the cottonwood trees. Penelope learned that Benjamin was more than just ambitious. He was thoughtful and well-read, despite having had only a few years of formal schooling. He carried a battered copy of Shakespeare's plays in his saddlebag and could recite passages from memory. He was patient and kind, stopping to help an old woman carry her groceries or to retrieve a child's ball that had rolled into the street. And he was determined to start his ranch, talking about it with such passion and detail that Penelope could almost see it herself. "I found the perfect spot," he told her on the 5th day as they sat by the creek watching the water flow past. "About 20 miles north of here. There is a valley with good grass, fresh water from a spring, and enough timber to build a house and barn. The land office says it is available for homesteading. It sounds wonderful. It could be with enough work." He picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water. "I have enough saved to buy a small herd to start, maybe 50 head. It will be hard the first few years, but if I can get through the first winter, I should be able to build from there. When will you file your claim?" "I already did. Yesterday." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I wanted to make sure I had something solid to offer before I asked you something important." Penelope's heart began to beat faster. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I have been in Shoshone for 10 days, and I have spent most of that time with you. And I know that people will say it is too fast, that we barely know each other, but Penelope, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I want to build that ranch, and I want to build it with you as my wife." She stared at him, momentarily speechless. "Benjamin, that is crazy. Reckless, I know. But I am 30 years old, and I have spent the last 15 years of my life preparing for this. I know what I want, and I want you. Not in spite of the things people say, but because of who you actually are. You are brave and kind and resilient. You have faced hardship and kept going. Those are exactly the qualities a person needs to build a life in this territory." "I do care for you," Penelope admitted, her voice shaking slightly. "More than I thought possible in such a short time. But what if something happens? What if the bad luck is real? Then we will face it together. But I do not believe it is real, Penelope. I think you have had some unfortunate coincidences, and people have used them to make you a scapegoat for their own fears and failures. But that ends now. Marry me. Come build this ranch with me. Let me prove to you that you are not bad luck. You are my greatest blessing." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but for the first time in years they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, gentle at first and then deeper, with a passion that made her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I will make you happy, Penelope, I swear it. You already have." They were married 3 days later by Reverend Walsh in the small church where Penelope had been teaching the children. Mrs. Porter and a few of the other boarders attended, along with Sheriff Morrison and his wife, the owner of the general store, and several of the children from Penelope's reading lessons. It was a small gathering, but it felt right. Penelope wore her mother's wedding dress, altered slightly to fit her frame, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Benjamin had picked that morning. When he saw her walking down the aisle, the look on his face made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. "Do you, Benjamin Thomas Carter, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Reverend Walsh asked. "I do," Benjamin said clearly, his eyes never leaving Penelope's face. "And do you, Penelope Marie Kane, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," she said, her voice strong and certain. "Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Benjamin cupped her face in his hands and kissed her tenderly, and the small congregation applauded. As they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, Penelope saw Martha Henderson sitting in one of the back pews. The banker's wife, whose husband had recovered from his shoulder wound, gave Penelope a small nod. It was not quite forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement, and that was something. There was a modest reception at the hotel restaurant, paid for by Benjamin despite their need to conserve money for the ranch. Sheriff Morrison raised a glass and made a toast. To the happy couple, may your life together be filled with good fortune and prosperity. Hear, hear, the other guests echoed. As the afternoon wore on, Penelope found herself surrounded by well-wishers. Even some of the people who had previously avoided her seemed willing to set aside their superstitions, at least for today. Perhaps it was Benjamin's obvious devotion, or perhaps it was simply that a wedding brought out the best in people. Either way, Penelope felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. That evening they stayed in the hotel's finest room, which was not particularly fine but felt like a palace to Penelope. Benjamin was gentle and patient, and when he made love to her for the first time, it was with such tenderness and reverence that she wept again. "Did I hurt you?" he asked, immediately concerned. "No," she said, touching his face. "No, I am just happy, so incredibly happy." He smiled and kissed her forehead. "Good, because I intend to keep you that happy for the rest of our lives." The next morning, they loaded Penelope's trunk and a few supplies onto a wagon Benjamin had purchased and set out for their new home. The journey took most of the day, following rough trails north into increasingly wild country. The mountains rose up around them, their peaks still dotted with snow even in late July. Eagles soared overhead, and they saw deer grazing in the meadows. "It is beautiful," Penelope said, looking around in wonder. "Wait until you see the valley." When they finally arrived, Penelope understood why Benjamin had been so excited. The valley was perhaps 5 miles across, nestled between gentle hills covered in pine trees. A stream ran through the center, fed by the spring Benjamin had mentioned, and the grass grew thick and green. There was a stand of cottonwood trees near the stream, providing shade, and the view of the mountains in the distance took her breath away. "This is ours?" she asked. "All ours." 160 acres, with the option to claim more in a few years if we improve the land. Benjamin had already made a few trips to the valley, and he had set up a large canvas tent near the cottonwoods. It was not much, but it would do until they could build something more permanent. He had also dug a fire pit and set up a basic camp kitchen. That first night, they sat by the fire and talked about their plans. "The first priority is shelter for the cattle," Benjamin said. "We need to build a barn and some corrals before winter, then we can work on a house." "What can I do to help?" "Everything. I will need your help with all of it. This is not going to be easy, Penelope. The work will be hard, and the first winter especially will be difficult, but I believe we can do it together." "So do I." Over the next few weeks, they fell into a routine. Benjamin would wake before dawn and work on clearing land for the barn, cutting timber and hauling stones for the foundation. Penelope helped where she could, though she quickly learned that she was better suited to other tasks. She set up a proper camp kitchen, learned to cook over an open fire, and began planning a vegetable garden. She also discovered that she had a talent for working with leather, and she spent her evenings making harnesses and other tack they would need. In August, Benjamin rode back to Shoshone and returned with 50 head of cattle he had purchased with most of their remaining savings. They were tough-range cattle, not particularly impressive to look at, but Benjamin assured her they would survive the winter if properly cared for. He also brought back lumber and supplies, including glass for windows and a small cast-iron stove that must have cost dearly. "I know we need to save money," he said when Penelope questioned the stove, "but I want you to have some comfort. You deserve that much." "I do not need comfort, Benjamin. I just need you. He pulled her close and kissed her. "You have me. You will always have me." By September, they had a barn standing, rough but sturdy, with corrals for the cattle. Benjamin was already talking about building the house, and Penelope had helped him pace out where it would go, on a slight rise overlooking the stream. It would be a simple structure at first, just 2 rooms, but they could add on later as their family grew. The thought of children both thrilled and terrified Penelope. What if her supposed bad luck extended to her children? But Benjamin refused to entertain such worries. "Our children will be healthy and strong," he insisted. "And even if we face challenges, we will face them together." One afternoon in late September, Penelope was in the tent mending one of Benjamin's shirts when she heard horses approaching. She stepped outside to see 3 riders coming down the valley trail. Benjamin was out checking on the cattle, and she was alone. A flicker of fear went through her, but she straightened her shoulders and waited. The 3 men who dismounted were rough-looking, unshaven and dusty from the trail. The one in front, a heavy-set man with a scar across his nose, looked around the camp appraisingly. "Afternoon, madam." "This the Carter place?" "It is. May I help you?" "Name is Jack Sullivan. These are my brothers Tom and Pete. We heard there was a new ranch starting up here, thought we might look for work. We are good hands, all 3 of us." Penelope studied them carefully. She knew Benjamin had mentioned wanting to hire help eventually, but they had planned to wait until spring. Still, good ranch hands could be hard to find. "My husband is out with the cattle. He should be back within the hour. You are welcome to wait." "Much obliged, madam." She offered them coffee, which they accepted gratefully, and they sat by the fire to wait. The men were polite enough, though she noticed they kept looking around the camp, taking note of everything. When Benjamin finally rode in, he was cautious but friendly. "Mr. Sullivan, is it? What brings you men out this way?" "Looking for work, Mr. Carter. Heard you might be hiring." Benjamin glanced at Penelope, and she could see him weighing the decision. They could certainly use the help, but taking on 3 men meant 3 salaries to pay, plus food and shelter. "I was not planning to hire until spring," he said honestly. "Money is tight right now." "We do not need much," Jack Sullivan said. "Just food and a place to sleep, plus maybe a small wage. We can help you finish building before winter sets in." 3 extra pairs of hands could make all the difference. It was a fair point, and Benjamin knew it. "Let me think about it. Can you come back tomorrow?" "We can do that." After the men left, Benjamin and Penelope discussed it over dinner. "What do you think?" he asked. "They seem capable enough, and they are right that we could use the help, but something about them made me uneasy." "Me too, but I cannot quite put my finger on what. Still, if we are going to get the house built before the snow comes, we need more hands." "I will ride into Shoshone tomorrow and ask around about them. If they have good references, we will hire them on a trial basis." The next day, Benjamin made the long ride to town while Penelope stayed at the ranch. When he returned that evening, he was frowning. "No one in Shoshone has heard of the Sullivan brothers. That does not mean they are not good workers, but it makes me cautious." "What did you tell them?" "I told them we would take them on for 1 month, with the understanding that if the work is not satisfactory, they move on." They agreed. "They will start tomorrow." The Sullivan brothers proved to be hard workers, and over the next few weeks, real progress was made on the house. The foundation was laid, the frame went up, and the walls began to take shape. Benjamin worked alongside them from dawn to dusk, and Penelope found herself cooking for 5 instead of 2. But her unease did not fade. There was something about the way Jack Sullivan looked at her when Benjamin was not around, something that made her skin crawl. And twice, she caught Tom going through their supplies in a way that seemed more like inventory than simple curiosity. She mentioned it to Benjamin one night as they lay in their tent. I do not trust them. I think we should let them go as soon as the house is finished." "I have been thinking the same thing," Benjamin admitted. "There is something not right about them, but they have not done anything wrong, and we did agree to a month. I will keep a close eye on them." The house was nearly finished when everything fell apart. It was mid-October, and an early snow had fallen the night before, just a dusting but a warning of what was to come. Penelope was inside the new house, which now had a roof and walls and a working stove, when she heard shouting outside. She rushed to the door to see Benjamin standing by the barn, facing all three Sullivan brothers. Jack had a gun drawn. "I told you, Carter, we want our fair share. We done a month's work. We deserve more than the pittance you are offering." "You got exactly what we agreed on," Benjamin said, his voice calm but his hand hovering near his own gun. "Food, shelter, and wages. Now take your money and leave my property." "We could take more than money," Pete said, his eyes sliding toward Penelope. "That is a pretty wife you got there." Benjamin's whole demeanor changed in an instant. "You touch her, and I will kill you where you stand." "Big words for a man outnumbered 3-1, Jack said. Penelope's heart was pounding. This was exactly the kind of situation people blamed on her. Men would die, and it would be her fault for being here, for marrying Benjamin, for bringing her bad luck to this valley. But even as the thought formed, she rejected it. These men had made their own choices. This was not her curse. It was their greed. "You do not want to do this," Benjamin said quietly. "Take your wages and ride out. There is no need for anyone to get hurt." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Tom made the mistake of reaching for his gun. Benjamin's hand moved faster than Penelope's eye could follow, and his gun was out and firing before Tom's had even cleared the holster. The shot hit Tom in the shoulder, and he went down with a cry. Jack fired back, but Benjamin had already moved, diving behind a water trough. The bullet went wide. Pete tried to circle around, but Penelope grabbed a heavy iron skillet from the kitchen and ran out, bringing it down hard on the back of his head. He crumpled to the ground. Jack turned toward her, and she saw death in his eyes. But Benjamin was there, his gun aimed at Jack's chest. "Drop it." Jack hesitated, then let his gun fall to the ground. "You are making a mistake, Carter. The only mistake was hiring you. Now get your brothers and get off my land. If I ever see any of you again, I will shoot first and ask questions later." Tom was bleeding but conscious. The three men gathered their horses and rode off, Jack casting one last venomous look back at Benjamin and Penelope. As soon as they were gone, Benjamin rushed to Penelope. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "I am fine. Are you hurt?" He checked himself over. "No, I am all right." Then he started to laugh, a slightly wild sound. "You hit him with a skillet." "It was the first thing I could reach." He pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "You are the bravest woman I have ever known, and that is exactly why you are my greatest blessing, not a curse. A cursed woman would have cowered inside. You came out fighting." Penelope buried her face in his chest, breathing in the familiar scent of him, with smoke and leather and something uniquely Benjamin. "People will say I brought this on you, that hiring those men was bad luck. Then people are fools. I hired them because I made a business decision. They turned out to be bad men. That has nothing to do with you." He pulled back to look at her. "Do you understand me, Penelope? Nothing that happened here today was your fault. It was theirs and mine for not listening to my instincts sooner. I was so afraid they would kill you. I was afraid they would hurt you, but we are both safe and they are gone. That is what matters." They reported the incident to Sheriff Morrison, who rode out to the ranch with 2 deputies to take their statements. The sheriff was concerned but not surprised. "The Sullivan brothers," he said. "We got word about them last week. They are wanted in Montana for robbery." You did the right thing sending them packing. I will put the word out, and hopefully someone will bring them in." After the sheriff left, Benjamin and Penelope stood together on the porch of their new house, looking out at the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "We make a good team," Benjamin said quietly. "We do." "Are you happy here, Penelope?" Truly happy, she thought about it, about the hard work and the isolation and the challenges they had already faced. But she also thought about waking up next to Benjamin every morning, about building something together, about the future stretching out before them full of possibility. "I am happier than I have ever been." Winter came hard that year, with heavy snows that blanketed the valley and temperatures that dropped well below freezing. But the house was solid and warm, and they had laid in plenty of supplies. The cattle huddled in the barn during the worst storms, and Benjamin checked on them every day without fail, sometimes in blizzards that left Penelope terrified he would not find his way back. But he always came back, stomping the snow off his boots and warming his hands by the stove while she fussed over him. They spent the long winter evenings reading by lamplight, playing cards, and talking about their plans for the spring. Benjamin taught her to play chess, and she taught him to braid leather more efficiently. In February, Penelope realized she was pregnant. She told Benjamin one morning over breakfast, watching his face carefully for his reaction. He went completely still for a moment, then a grin spread across his face so wide it looked like it might split his cheeks. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "Yes. In late summer, I think." He came around the table and pulled her into his arms, lifting her right off her feet and spinning her around. "This is the best news, the absolute best news. We are going to be parents, Penelope. You are not worried?" she asked. "About what people might say." His expression sobered. "I do not give a damn what people say. This is our child, and they will be perfect, and they will be loved. That is all that matters." The baby was born in early September of 1884, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Benjamin's father, with the middle name James. Penelope labored for 14 hours, with Benjamin by her side the entire time, and a midwife from Shoshone, who had ridden out 2 days before, when Penelope's pain started. When the midwife placed the baby in Penelope's arms, she felt a love so fierce and overwhelming it was almost frightening. "Hello, Thomas," she whispered. "We have been waiting for you." Benjamin touched his son's tiny hand and the baby's fingers wrapped around his. "He is perfect." "You are perfect. I love you both so much." The midwife, a practical woman named Mrs. O'Brien, smiled at them. "You have a fine, healthy son. And you did wonderfully, Mrs. Carter. I will stay a few more days to make sure you both continue to do well." Over the next few days, Penelope and Benjamin learned the rhythms of parenthood. Thomas was a good baby, sleeping for long stretches and nursing well. Benjamin was a devoted father, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor with Thomas when he was fussy so Penelope could rest. "I never knew I could love someone this much," Benjamin said one night, holding his sleeping son. "I thought I understood love when I met you, but this is different. This is our family, Penelope. Everything I have ever worked for, it is all for this." By the following spring, they had increased their herd to 75 head of cattle, and Benjamin had hired 2 reliable ranch hands from Shoshone, young men he had thoroughly vetted. The ranch was becoming profitable, and they were able to add 2 more rooms to the house. Penelope started a proper garden, growing vegetables and herbs, and she began raising chickens for eggs and meat. Thomas was walking by his first birthday, a sturdy little boy who followed his father everywhere. He would toddle after Benjamin to the barn, chattering in his own language, and Benjamin would patiently explain everything he was doing as if Thomas could understand every word. He is going to be a rancher like his father, Penelope said, watching them from the kitchen window. Only if that is what he wants, Benjamin replied. Whatever he chooses to do, we will support him. In the fall of 1885, Penelope discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, and she spent much of it exhausted and nauseated. But Benjamin was patient and supportive, taking over more of the household duties and hiring a woman from town to come help a few days a week. Their daughter was born in April of 1886, a tiny thing with green eyes like her mother and a surprisingly loud cry. They named her Sarah Marie, and if Penelope had thought she could not love another child as much as she loved Thomas, she quickly learned otherwise. The years passed in a rhythm of hard work and simple joys. The ranch grew and prospered. They built a bigger barn, expanded the house again, and increased their herd. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy who loved reading as much as his mother and working with the cattle as much as his father. Sarah was quieter but equally bright, with a talent for drawing that delighted Penelope. In 1889, when Thomas was 5 and Sarah was 3, Penelope gave birth to twin boys, Daniel and Robert. The births were difficult, and the doctor they brought from Shoshone warned them that Penelope should not have any more children. But the twins were healthy and strong, identical down to the small birthmark behind their left ears. 4 children, Benjamin said wonderingly, holding both twins at once. We have 4 perfect children. Our family is complete, Penelope agreed, though she felt a pang at the thought of no more babies. But their family was not quite complete. In 1891, when Penelope was 30 years old, she found herself pregnant once more despite the doctor's warnings. She was terrified, knowing the risks, but Benjamin held her hand and promised her everything would be all right. We have faced worse together, he said. We will face this too. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. Penelope spent the last 2 months on bed rest, while Benjamin managed the ranch, and the children with the help of hired hands and neighbors who had become good friends over the years. The whispers about bad luck had long since faded, replaced by respect for the hard-working couple who had built one of the most successful ranches in the territory. In February of 1892, Penelope gave birth to another daughter, a tiny but feisty girl they named Elizabeth Rose. The birth was touch and go, and for a few terrifying hours, Benjamin thought he might lose both his wife and his new daughter. But Penelope was stronger than anyone gave her credit for, and she fought her way back from the brink. No more, the doctor said firmly. Mrs. Carter, your body cannot take another pregnancy. You have given your husband 5 beautiful children. Be content with that blessing. I am, Penelope whispered, exhausted but alive. I am content. By the turn of the century, the Carter Ranch was one of the largest and most successful in Idaho. Thomas, at 16, was already helping his father manage the operation. Sarah, at 14, was an accomplished artist whose paintings decorated their home and won prizes at the county fair. The twins, at 11, were inseparable and full of mischief. And Elizabeth, at 8, was the baby of the family and thoroughly spoiled by everyone. Benjamin, at 47, had some gray in his hair and lines around his eyes, but he was still strong and vigorous. He and Penelope would often walk together in the evenings, hand in hand, looking out at the land they had built together. You remember when people called you bad luck? Benjamin asked one evening as they watched the sunset. Sometimes. It seems like a lifetime ago. You were never bad luck. You were always my greatest blessing. You still are. Penelope leaned her head on his shoulder. I used to think I was cursed, that I would spend my whole life alone, blamed for things that were not my fault, and then you came along and refused to believe the lies. I saw the truth. I saw you. You saved me, Benjamin. No. He turned to face her, his blue eyes as clear and honest as they had been the day they met. We saved each other. You gave me a reason to build all this, a reason beyond just proving I could do it. You gave me a home, a family, a life worth living. They kissed as the sun dipped below the mountains. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. In 1903, Thomas married a sweet girl from Shoshone named Amanda, and they moved into a house on the far end of the ranch property. The following year, they gave Benjamin and Penelope their first grandchild, a boy named Benjamin Thomas Carter II. Penelope held her grandson and marveled at how quickly time had passed. "We are getting old," she said to Benjamin that night. "Speak for yourself. I am just getting started." But they both knew their bodies were not what they used to be. Benjamin's back ached after long days in the saddle, and Penelope's hands were sometimes stiff with arthritis. But they were happy, surrounded by their children and the beginning of a new generation. Sarah announced her engagement in 1905 to a school teacher from Boise, a quiet, scholarly man who loved her art and encouraged her creativity. The twins, now 23, were running much of the day-to-day ranch operations, allowing Benjamin to step back slightly. And Elizabeth, at 21, was studying to be a nurse, determined to help people. "We did well," Penelope said to Benjamin one evening as they sat on their porch, watching Thomas and Amanda playing with their children in the yard. They now had 3 grandchildren with another on the way. "We did better than well. We built an empire." I was thinking more about the family than the ranch. The family is the empire. Benjamin reached over and took her hand. Everything else is just details. In 1910, Penelope fell ill with pneumonia, the same disease that had taken her mother. For weeks, she lay in bed, fighting for breath, while Benjamin sat by her side and refused to leave. The children took turns keeping vigil, and the doctor came every day. "You have to fight," Benjamin told her during one of her more lucid moments. "I cannot do this without you, Penelope. Our grandchildren need their grandmother. I need you." "I am trying," she whispered. "I am so tired, Benjamin. I know, but you are the strongest person I have ever known. You can beat this." And somehow she did. Slowly, painfully, she began to recover. By spring, she was up and walking again, though she had lost weight and her hair had gone completely gray. Benjamin did not care. He looked at her with the same devotion he had shown since the day they met. "Still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," he said, and she knew he meant it. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary in 1913, surrounded by all 5 of their children, 7 grandchildren, and what felt like half the county. The party was held at the ranch, with tables set up outside and music and dancing that lasted late into the night. Sheriff Morrison, now retired and in his 80s, raised a glass and a toast. "To Benjamin and Penelope Carter, who proved that love and hard work can build anything. May they have many more years together." "Hear, hear," the crowd echoed. Benjamin stood and pulled Penelope to her feet. "I have something to say. 30 years ago, I met this woman in Shoshone. People told me she was bad luck, that any man who got close to her would suffer. But I looked at her and saw something completely different. I saw strength and kindness and courage. And I knew even then that she was not bad luck. She was my greatest blessing. 30 years, 5 children, and more happiness than any man has a right to, and I stand by those words. Penelope Carter, you are my greatest blessing, and I love you more today than I did the day we married." Penelope's eyes filled with tears. "And you are mine. Everything good in my life started the day you walked into that boarding house and refused to listen to the gossip. You saw me when everyone else saw only superstition and fear. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. And you built this beautiful life with me. I love you, Benjamin Carter, with everything I am." They kissed while their family and friends applauded. Two people who had found each other in the unlikeliest of circumstances and created something extraordinary. Benjamin died in 1925 at the age of 72, sitting on the porch he had built with his own hands, looking out at the land he loved. He had been feeling poorly for a few days, but he refused to stay in bed. "I am not dying in a bed," he told Penelope. "I want to see the mountains." So she sat with him on the porch, holding his hand while their children and grandchildren gathered around. He looked at each of them, his eyes still clear and blue despite his age. "I am proud of all of you," he said. "Take care of each other, take care of the land, and take care of your mother." "We will, Pa," Thomas said, his voice thick with tears. Benjamin turned to Penelope. "I kept my promise. I made you happy. You did. Every day. Good. That is all I ever wanted." He smiled at her, the same smile that had made her fall in love with him 42 years ago. "You are my greatest blessing, Penelope. Always were. Always will be. And you are mine." He closed his eyes and took one last breath, peaceful and content, and was gone. Penelope lived another 12 years, watching her grandchildren grow up and start families of their own. She saw Thomas expand the ranch even further. Sarah's art displayed in galleries across the West. The twins become pillars of the community, and Elizabeth become one of the most respected nurses in the state. She spent her last years in the house Benjamin had built, surrounded by love and family, and when people asked her about the old rumors about being called bad luck, she would smile and shake her head. "I was never bad luck," she would say. "I was just waiting for the right man to see the truth. And when he did, he gave me a life more blessed than I ever dreamed possible." Penelope died in her sleep in 1937 at the age of 76, in the bed she had shared with Benjamin for over 40 years. Her children found her in the morning, peaceful and still, with a smile on her face. And in her hand, she clutched an old, faded photograph of a tall cowboy with blue eyes and a smile that could light up the world. They buried her next to Benjamin in the family cemetery on the ranch, under a cottonwood tree where they used to sit and plan their future. The headstone reads simply, "Penelope Carter, beloved wife and mother, 1861–1937, my greatest blessing." The Carter Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family, a testament to two people who refused to believe in bad luck and instead chose to believe in love. And every Carter child and grandchild and great-grandchild grew up hearing the story of how Benjamin Carter saw past the superstitions and recognized Penelope Kane for what she truly was. Not a curse, but a blessing that changed his life and created a legacy that would endure for over a century. In the end, the whispers were proven wrong. Penelope brought no bad luck to any man. Instead, she brought love, strength, and prosperity to the man brave enough to see her for who she really was. And together, they built something that would outlast them both, a family and a ranch that stood as proof that love could overcome any obstacle, any fear, any superstition. The cowboy had been right all along. She was his greatest blessing, and he had been hers.